Here is an interesting question to think about. What counts as a separate game? Now, at first glance, this seems like a silly question. No one would confuse Chrono Trigger for Super Mario Galaxy. But what about sequels? What about Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario Galaxy 2? But what about director's cuts? What about HD re-releases? Let's use our noggins. Noggin. Hello all, it is Logston, and thinking about this question, what counts as a separate game, is actually a lot more interesting than you'd think. There's some bit of philosophy involved. But for simplicity's sake, let's start by just talking about Pokemon. Every main title in this series is released in two separate games. Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, X and Y, and sometimes a third game is thrown in there. The differences between these versions are minor. There are some Pokemon that are only catchable in one version of the game or another, and sometimes different events will occur within game. But is that enough to call it a completely different game? Nintendo thinks so, as they advertise it as Pokemon Black and White, X and Y. There's that "and" in there, which separates them. But when Pokemon fans refer to these games, they typically refer to them as an acronym, such as ORAS, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, or HGSS, Heart Gold and Soul Silver. This could be basically because from the fans' perspective, they are indeed one game. But when you throw in the third title, things start to get confusing. For instance, Pokemon Emerald basically took Pokemon Sapphire and Pokemon Ruby, merged them, and then added additional content, essentially showing that Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire didn't have to be separated at all. They could very easily have just been one game. The same goes for all the games that have done this. So in the case of Pokemon, are Diamond and Pearl two separate games? And with the inclusion of Platinum, are they three separate games? Or do they all combine to make DPP, as it's typically referred to by fans? But this is just one step into the foggy abyss that is this question, and let's take a step further. What about re-releases? What about HD remakes and director's cuts? Well, first of all, there's the big HD re-releases, such as DuckTales Remastered. DuckTales Remastered was a 2013 remake of a game from 1989. While the core levels and game mechanics are very identical, even the same, this remake added levels, voice acting, and crazy updated the graphics. But at its core, is this still the same game? Just updated? Well, maybe we should look at another example of an HD re-release, like The Last of Us Remastered. This was a 2014 remastering of a 2013 game. The original Last of Us was released on the PlayStation 3, but with the new PlayStation 4 out now, Naughty Dog decided to update the graphics a bit and release The Last of Us on the PlayStation 4 as The Last of Us Remastered. So is a slight graphical update worthy of making this considered a different game? Now, let's look at director's cuts, like, for instance, Deus Ex Human Revolution director's cut. On top of the slight graphical update, it also includes additional content, that being the DLC. And Fallout 3 Game of the Year Edition is just Fallout 3 with all of the DLC pre-installed. Does that make it a different game? Now, what if you buy one set of DLC, and your friend buys a completely different set of DLC? Are you both playing the same game, or are they now different? Separate, considered to be different games altogether. If adding content to the game changes the game, that is, makes it considered a different game, then what about console-exclusive content? For instance, Destiny on the PlayStation 4 has plenty of exclusive side quests. So does that make the PS4 version of Destiny completely different from the Xbox One version? Now what if you applied that logic to every multi-platform game? For instance, throwing it out there, 2013 Tomb Raider. This game has QuickTime events. On the PlayStation, the QuickTime events show shapes. On the Xbox 360 and PC, they show letters. Does that separate them because they each have different content, different graphics? So are these two separate games? Now what about games that are collections of games? Like everything just fell. Like Namco Museum 50th Anniversary. This game includes 14 classic hits. Now obviously Pac-Man and Galaga are completely separate games, but on this, do they still count as separate individual games? Do you hold in your hand, right now, 14 classic hits? Or is this one game, one Namco Museum 50th Anniversary? If you do include all of these games, are you now holding 15 games instead of the 14 it claims it has, because this in itself is another game? I'd like to point to Russell's Paradox, the classic, does a set of all sets contain itself? As I've been pondering this question, things have been getting grayer and grayer. So let's get even grayer still. Do game updates make games different? As in, do they count as different games? Let's look at Minecraft, for example. Any hardcore Minecraft fan can tell you that the original beta release of Minecraft is vastly different from modern Minecraft. But they are still both Minecraft. It was never re-released. The modern Minecraft isn't a sequel to classic beta Minecraft. It's still the same game. But now it's so different than it used to be that it's basically a bigger change than a lot of HD re-releases have seen. So does Minecraft version 1.8.3 count as a separate game from Minecraft 1.0? Consider this. You have a hammer. After many years of use, the handle snaps in half. So you just replace the handle, keep the original head. Then, a few years later, after more and more use, the head finally shatters. So, you replace the head. Is this the same hammer you had before? Maybe we should get into something more advanced, like a gaming PC. Let's say you buy a brand new gaming PC and it's super awesome. You put it all together with all the parts, and you love it. But as the years go by, you start noticing that you can't play new games on maximum graphics anymore. So, you start upgrading, piece by piece, over the years. You start with the motherboard, and that's a bad idea to start with the motherboard, but you start with the graphics cards, and then the processor, and then the hard drives, and the RAM, and all. Piece by piece, you start rebuilding the computer. Eventually, everything has been replaced. You may even completely replace the case at some point, just moving the insides from your old computer into the new case. So, after you've updated everything, after every part has been replaced, is it still the same computer it was? It's been slowly changing over the years, piece by piece, as you added new parts in. And now you have the leftover parts. You could still go back and put your old parts together into an older gaming PC. So are these two PCs now the same computer? Since after all, that was your original gaming PC forever ago, but your gaming PC has been changing. On and on, just changing, until now your gaming PC is this one. So have you completely copied your gaming PC? We could go even deeper with this. Let's talk about the human body. Every 7 years, your body will have replaced every cell in its system. Which is very interesting to think about. It's all at a different rate. For instance, your skin cells will rejuvenate every few weeks or so. Your spine take the longest. 7 years. So after those 7 years, your skin has replaced itself many, many times over, but your spine is just now getting to the point where it's completely replaced itself. So if you go back in time 7 years and meet your previous self, will the universe end? That's not what this is about. But if you do that, will you be meeting yourself or a previous version of you that is completely different? Are you still the you that you were 7 years ago? Think about that. There's no right answer to these. These questions are all philosophical, so tell me down below what you think. What do you think counts as a separate game? Sequels, remakes, updates, versions? Where does that line get drawn? And before I go, I have one more thing to show you. you likely have many games that have many various versions to them, and thus GamesGrabber is a cool website to help you manage your collections of games. From games you own, to games you want, games that you think fit a certain genre that you want to show off to someone, anything really. Plus, it saves links to all of them for you to buy later. And they recently introduced the Kudos system, where you can earn points by basically just using the site, building and sharing collections, and viewing others. With enough points, you can have your collections featured like mine are on here, and you can even use the points to earn prizes. And getting your first 1,000 points is easy. Simply sign up and complete your profile. There's a link in the description for you to check it out and maybe give me a follow on there. So until next time, stay awesome. In Alpha Sapphire, or HGSS, Heart Gold and Soul Silver. This could be basically because from the fans' perspective, they are indeed one game. But when you throw in the third title, things start to get confusing. For instance, Pokemon Emerald basically took Pokemon Sapphire and Pokemon Ruby, merged them, and then added additional content, re-releases. Let's use our noggins. Noggin. Hello all, it is Logston, and thinking about this question, what counts as a separate game, is actually a lot more interesting than you'd think. There's some bit of philosophy involved. But for simplicity's sake, let's start by just talking about Pokemon. Every main title in this series is released in two separate games, Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, X and Y, and sometimes a third game is thrown in there. The differences between these versions are minor. There are some Pokemon that are only catchable in one version of the game or another, and sometimes different events will occur within game. But here is an interesting question to think about. What counts as a separate game? Now, at first glance, this seems like a silly question. No one would confuse Chrono Trigger for Super Mario Galaxy. But what about sequels? What about Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario Galaxy 2? But what about director's cuts? What about HD? Is that enough to call it a completely different game? Nintendo thinks so, as they advertise it as Pokemon Black and White, X and Y. There's that "and" in there, which separates them. But when Pokemon fans refer to these games, they typically refer to them as an acronym, such as ORAs, Omega Ruby,